Executives love the lie that everyone is replaceable. It helps them sleep after discarding the people who built their empires. But what happens when an arrogant CEO fires the one person holding the kill switch to his operation? And I do not fight back. I simply smile, pack my desk, and walk out to watch the countdown begin. If you think titles equal power, let me teach you one expensive lesson about who truly runs the game. Hello to the wonderful audience of Boss Revenge Stories. I want to sincerely thank you for your continuous support, but unfortunately, YouTube has disabled our monetization, leaving us without the budget to keep the channel running, which means we will not be uploading new videos here in the near future. Instead, we are moving our operations to Patreon. So if you enjoyed today's story, please consider supporting us there to access exclusive, true stories that are even longer, feature more detailed situations we cannot share on YouTube, and include multiple emotional voiceovers. You can join by simply scanning the Patreon QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the description or the comments of this video. Now, let us dive into today's story, where you will step into the shoes of a woman named Isla Watson. I sat in perfect silence inside the flashy, floor-to-ceiling glass office of Julian Vance. I am 35 years old, holding the dual titles of Chief Systems Architect and Compliance Advisor at Ethos Grid, located right in the bustling heart of the Austin, Texas tech hub, or at least, I was. The air conditioning in Julian's office was set to a freezing temperature, a sharp contrast to the scorching Texas heat radiating against the windows outside. It matched his personality perfectly. Julian was the newly appointed Chief Executive Officer, a young, aggressive executive brought in from the retail sector with absolutely zero technical background. His mandate was clear and heavily publicized to the board of directors. He was hired to trim the fat and beautify the third-quarter financial reports in preparation for a massive initial public offering. He was exactly the kind of corporate vulture who valued spreadsheets over source code and profit margins over institutional knowledge. He paced behind his massive, custom-built oak desk, aggressively adjusting the cuffs of his overly expensive tailored suit. He moved with the restless, loud energy of a man desperate to prove he was the smartest person in the room. I simply watched him, my hands folded neatly in my lap, observing his erratic movements with the cold detachment of a scientist watching a rodent navigate a maze. With a dramatic sigh, Julian picked up my thick personnel file and tossed it heavily across the polished surface of his desk. It slid and stopped just inches from my hands, the pages threatening to spill out. "I will get straight to the point, Isla," he began, his voice dripping with a practiced corporate sympathy that felt entirely hollow. "We are restructuring. As we move toward the initial public offering, we need to streamline our operations. Ethos Grid is carrying too much dead weight. After reviewing your department, I have determined that your position is a redundant cost. We have junior software engineers who can do the technical work for a fraction of the price, and our external legal team can handle the compliance side. We simply do not need a highly paid hybrid role draining our resources." He pushed a thick termination agreement toward me. The paper was crisp, the terms undoubtedly dictated by his frantic desire to cut costs immediately to secure his own end-of-year bonus. His condescending attitude filled the small room, thick and suffocating. He leaned forward, resting his knuckles on the desk, offering me a self-satisfied smirk. "Do not take this personally, Isla. In the business world, everyone is replaceable. Even you. It is just business." I expected a reaction. He expected me to cry, to beg for my livelihood, or perhaps to launch into a fiery, desperate tirade about my unyielding loyalty. He probably expected me to aggressively remind him that I had spent the last 10 years of my life building the core foundation of this company from the ground up, writing the very architecture that allowed Ethos Grid to exist in the first place. He waited for the emotional breakdown that executives like him feed on to validate their own power and dominance. I gave him absolutely nothing. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice or argue about my decade of tireless dedication. I did not mention the countless late nights, the complex cryptographic algorithms, or the federal security clearances I had personally secured for this firm. I just looked at him, feeling a deep, quiet calm wash over my entire being. It is the specific kind of calm that comes only when you realize the person trying to destroy you has just unknowingly handed you the detonator to their own explosive demise. I reached into my bag, pulled out my favorite heavy titanium pen, and looked him dead in the eyes. I asked him one single, even-toned question. "Are you certain this is an official and irrevocable termination?" Julian sneered, clearly annoyed by my complete lack of distress. He snatched his own luxury pen, quickly flipped to the final page of the document, and signed his name with a violent, jagged flourish that tore slightly into the paper. "It is completely irrevocable," he snapped, pushing the document forcefully back to me. "Now, I am going to need you to hand over your employee access badge and leave the premises immediately." A slow, mysterious smile crept onto my lips. It was a smile born of pure, unadulterated anticipation. I signed the acknowledgement line on the termination paperwork, keeping my handwriting smooth, elegant, and perfectly legible. I unclipped the plastic name badge from my blazer lapel and placed it gently on top of the signed contract. Without uttering another word, I picked up my leather tote bag, stood up, and smoothed the minor wrinkles from my skirt. I turned my back on the arrogant young executive, calmly walked out of his pristine glass office, and headed straight for the main exit. I did not look back, completely at peace knowing that Julian Vance had just proudly fired the only person keeping his entire corporate empire alive. Aetherus Grid is not your typical software startup, pushing out trivial social networking applications or basic retail inventory tools. Our flagship product, the very lifeblood that inflated our corporate valuation to astronomical heights, is a highly classified, national security data routing network. We manage the kind of deeply encrypted traffic that keeps the nation safe from foreign cyber threats. The primary client keeping the lights on in that gleaming glass tower is the United States Department of Defense, securing active, ironclad contracts worth upwards of $4 billion. Julian Vance, with his glittering resume built entirely on selling high-end athletic wear and maximizing retail supply chains, saw only the bottom line on a balance sheet. He viewed lines of code as interchangeable commodities and engineers as easily replaceable factory workers, what he completely failed to understand, primarily because he lacked the intellect and the patience to read through 300 pages of highly classified legal technicalities, was the true architecture of our most lucrative asset. You see, Aetherus Grid does not actually own the proprietary core encryption system that the Department of Defense heavily relies upon. The company merely leases it, 7 years ago, recognizing the immense vulnerability of corporate buyouts and the greed of incoming executives. I patented the foundational cryptographic architecture under a private, independent legal trust. I legally named myself as the sole trustee and creator. I then licensed this vital technology exclusively to Aetherus Grid for a nominal, almost insulting fee of exactly $1 per year. It was a brilliant, symbiotic relationship designed entirely to protect the technology from hostile corporate takeovers while allowing the company to secure massive federal contracts. However, dealing with military-grade encryption comes with incredibly strict federal regulations. The United States government does not play fast and loose with national security. To utilize a third-party licensed technology for defense purposes, the government mandates the active, uninterrupted presence of an official architecture guarantor. That specific guarantor is legally obligated to be a full-time, active employee on the company payroll to continuously validate and maintain the integrity of the security certificates. For Aetherus Grid, the sole designated guarantor was me. When Julian proudly signed that termination agreement in his freezing office, he truly thought he was just optimizing a spreadsheet. He believed he was simply removing an overly expensive mid-level manager to secure his own multi-million-dollar end-of-year bonus. In reality, he had just blindly swung an axe at the main load-bearing pillar of his entire organization. By firing me, he did not just cut my salary, He automatically and immediately triggered a dormant legal clause embedded deep within our government contracts. Without the active, verified presence of the architecture guarantor, Aetherus Grid was instantly stripped of its legal right to operate the encryption system. Their multi-billion-dollar contracts were now legally compromised. The harsh midday sun was beating down on the scorching Texas pavement as I slid into the driver's seat of my sedan. I did not drive home to wallow in despair or draft an angry email to the Human Resources Department. Instead, I drove 3 blocks down the street to a quiet, familiar artisan coffee shop I frequented on weekends. The comforting scent of roasted coffee beans and sweet vanilla was a welcoming contrast to the sterile, hostile air of my former office. I ordered a large iced black tea, found a secluded wooden table in the back corner, and connected my personal laptop to the heavily encrypted secure hotspot on my mobile phone. I carefully navigated through a complex series of multi-factor authentication prompts until I reached the internal compliance portal for federal defense contractors. The government interface was clunky, gray, and aggressively utilitarian. I opened the designated Personnel Compliance tab and located the specific, highly monitored digital document labeled Change of Employment Status. I typed in my secure credentials, verified my biometric identity, and selected the drop-down option indicating an involuntary termination by the employer, effective immediately. There was absolutely no malice in my fingers as they hovered over the laptop trackpad. I felt no burning need for petty vengeance or dramatic, tearful retribution. This was simply the law. I was merely a dedicated professional, strictly adhering to the rigorous federal compliance protocols I had sworn an oath to uphold. With a gentle, deliberate tap, I clicked the final submit button. The screen buffered for exactly 2 seconds before flashing a bright green confirmation banner. The silent alarm had been tripped. The invisible legal dominoes were now in motion, and there was absolutely nothing Julian Vance could do to stop the devastating chain reaction he had just started. For the next 48 hours, my life became a portrait of absolute, undisturbed tranquility. I completely severed all digital ties with the corporate world. My company-issued smartphone was powered down and shoved into the darkest corner of my junk drawer. Instead of waking up at dawn to decrypt server logs and manage anxious government liaisons, I slept in. I took long, unhurried walks through the sprawling green trails of a local park with my golden retriever. The Texas breeze was warm. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the relentless buzzing of corporate emergencies felt like a distant, faded memory. I was completely at peace, enjoying the rare luxury of uninterrupted time, utterly detached from the chaos I had left behind. But while I was throwing tennis balls in the park, a very different kind of energy was brewing deep within the digital infrastructure of the federal government. The moment I had clicked submit at that coffee shop, an automated protocol had awakened inside the heavily guarded servers of the Department of Defense. The system instantly processed my change of employment status. Recognizing the critical absence of the designated architecture guarantor, a deeply embedded security fail-safe was automatically triggered. The government servers did not panic, nor did they send out dramatic red alerts. They simply initiated a silent, unyielding 72-hour grace period. A digital clock began ticking backward in the shadows, counting down the seconds until Aetherus Grid would be entirely locked out of the national security network, oblivious to the invisible ticking bomb beneath his feet. Julian Vance was busy celebrating his own genius. On Wednesday evening, he hosted an extravagant wine and cheese reception for the board of directors in the executive penthouse suite. He poured glasses of wildly expensive vintage wine, boasting loudly about his aggressive restructuring strategy. He proudly presented the newly trimmed financial projections, gloating about how he had successfully optimized the payroll by eliminating what he called bloated, overpaid freeloaders. He soaked in the applause of the out-of-touch board members, entirely convinced that his ruthless cost-cutting had practically guaranteed a record-breaking initial public offering. Down in the freezing, neon-lit basement of the company, the reality of the situation was just beginning to surface. Marcus, the brilliant but chronically overworked head of cybersecurity, received a strange automated email from the Federal Compliance Portal. The subject line simply read, "Guarantor absence warning." Confused and slightly panicked by the unprecedented alert, Marcus immediately printed the log and rushed to the executive suite. He found Julian standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, swirling his wine and admiring the city skyline. "Mr. Vance, we just received a highly unusual automated ping from the Department of Defense servers," Marcus said, his voice tight with genuine concern. "It is citing a missing guarantor protocol. I have never seen this specific error code before, and I cannot bypass it on my end." Julian barely even looked at the printed log. He waved his hand dismissively, his face flushed with alcohol and unearned arrogance. "Relax, Marcus," Julian scoffed, taking another arrogant sip of his wine. "It is just a minor software glitch. The federal systems are ancient and they bug out all the time. Have your department run a diagnostic patch and ignore it. I do not want to hear about minor technical hiccups right now. We have real business to focus on." Marcus hesitated, knowing deep down that federal security systems did not simply experience minor glitches, but under the crushing weight of Julian's dismissive authority. He nodded reluctantly and retreated to his basement office, leaving the alert unresolved and completely uninvestigated. For the remainder of Thursday, Julian poured every ounce of his energy into rehearsing his speech for the highly anticipated Friday morning press conference. He stood in front of a mirror, practicing his charismatic smiles and perfecting exactly how he would announce the massive public offering to the financial media. He was completely blind to the catastrophic storm gathering right above his head. The false peace held steadily as the sun set over Austin. The city grew quiet, but the digital countdown did not rest. It ticked down relentlessly, second by second, completely deaf to Julian's grand ambitions. Then, exactly at midnight on Thursday, the federal grace period expired. The silent clock hit 0. The trap slammed shut. The chaos did not announce itself with a polite knock. It kicked the door down at exactly 6 o'clock on Friday morning. Down in the subterranean server farm of Aetherus Grid, the quiet hum of cooling fans was suddenly pierced by the shrill, deafening screech of automated klaxons. Row after row of towering mainframe racks, usually illuminated by a steady, comforting blue glow, simultaneously flashed a violent, blinding red. 1,000 miles away in Washington, highly classified data streams abruptly flatlined. Military defense contractors, intelligence analysts, and federal operatives, staring at their secure terminals, were met with a chilling universal error message indicating a catastrophic loss of secure routing. The National Security Data Network had instantly gone dark, severed completely from its host. Inside the Aetherus Grid technical department, absolute pandemonium erupted. Marcus spilled his scalding black coffee across his desk as his monitoring dashboard lit up like a horrific fireworks display of critical system failures. He frantically hammered away at his keyboard, shouting orders to a room full of terrified software engineers. They attempted everything in their arsenal. They tried cold reboots, emergency server migrations, and desperate attempts to write bypass codes to reroute the encrypted traffic. Nothing worked. Every single backdoor, every emergency protocol, and every desperate digital crowbar they threw at the network bounced off an impenetrable wall of cryptography. Instead of granting access, the massive screens in the command center flickered and locked onto a single, unyielding prompt. The terminal demanded a live, active personnel security token and an immediate biometric iris scan from the legally designated architecture guarantor. The system explicitly demanded my presence, and the server cross-referenced the human resources database, confirming my employment had been officially terminated. The system functioned exactly as it was designed to under a compromised state. It shut the entire castle down to prevent unauthorized espionage. Upstairs in the executive penthouse, Julian Vance was standing in front of a mirror, adjusting a silk tie worth thousands of dollars, completely ready to face the financial media and announce his glorious initial public offering. His triumphant morning was shattered when his smartphone began vibrating so violently it nearly rattled off the marble countertop. Minutes later, Julian violently pushed open the heavy security doors of the server room. His face was flushed crimson with rage, his expensive tie hanging loosely around his neck, and his carefully styled hair was a disheveled mess. He looked less like a visionary chief executive and more like a panicked animal caught in a trap. "What in the world is going on down here?" Julian screamed over the blaring alarms, spittle flying from his lips. "The financial press is setting up their cameras in the lobby. Fix this right now. Get the network back online." Marcus, trembling and sweating profusely, stood up from his terminal and faced the furious executive. "We cannot fix it, Julian," Marcus shouted back, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. "The core encryption system locked us out entirely. The federal servers detected that the architecture guarantor has been removed from the active payroll. The system requires Isla Watson to physically authorize a reboot with her biometric signature and her active employee security token. We are entirely locked out of our own product." Julian's eyes widened in disbelief and fury. He slammed his fists onto a metal console. "Then bypass it. Write a new code. Hack into our own system if you have to. I am the chief executive officer of this company, and I am ordering you to break through that firewall right now." The entire server room fell dead silent, save for the rhythmic blaring of the red warning lights. Dozens of highly trained engineers stared at Julian in absolute horror. His demand fully exposed his complete, dangerous ignorance of cybersecurity and federal law. "Hack it," Marcus repeated, his tone shifting from panic to sheer disbelief. "Julian, that is a Class 1 federal felony, even if we possess the quantum computing power required to crack a military-grade encryption, which we absolutely do not. Attempting to breach a Department of Defense server would send every single one of us to federal prison for treason. The network is working perfectly. It is protecting the data from unauthorized entities. And as of 3 days ago, Aetherus Grid legally became an unauthorized entity." Before Julian could even process the magnitude of his foolish command, his phone chimed with a highly encrypted alert. It was not a text from a board member. It was a Priority 1 communication directly from the United States Department of Defense. Julian snatched his phone, his eyes scanning the glowing screen. The blood rapidly drained from his face as he read the heavily formalized words. The federal government had formally issued an immediate, indefinite suspension of the $4 billion defense contract. The notice cited a critical, unmitigated breach of national security compliance protocols. The government was not just pausing the contract, they were initiating a full federal investigation and threatening a catastrophic lawsuit for severe corporate negligence. The very foundation of Aetherus Grid was being legally dismantled in real time. But the avalanche was only just beginning to fall. In the ruthless world of high finance, bad news travels at the speed of light. The automated federal suspension instantly triggered regulatory red flags across the financial sector. The massive investment banks in New York, the very institutions underwriting the highly anticipated initial public offering, received the automated alerts regarding the sudden loss of the company's primary source of revenue. Julian's phone rang again. It was the lead underwriter from Wall Street. Julian answered with a shaking hand. The call lasted less than 30 seconds. The voice on the other end was cold and completely devoid of sympathy. The investment banks were immediately freezing all plans to go public. They were pulling their financial backing entirely, effectively turning a company that was supposed to be valued in the billions into a worthless, burning liability in the span of just 15 minutes. Julian stumbled backward, his knees giving out beneath him. He collapsed heavily into a cheap, rolling office chair near the server racks. The deafening alarms in the server room seemed to fade into a muffled, distant buzz as a crushing, suffocating realization descended upon him. His breathing grew incredibly shallow, his skin turning a sickly, translucent white. He stared blankly at his trembling hands, the very hands that had signed his own professional death warrant. The devastating truth finally pierced through his impenetrable ego. The arrogant termination agreement he had so proudly and violently signed with his luxury pen 3 days ago was not a clever cost-cutting measure. He had not fired a redundant employee to save a few pennies. He had gleefully pushed a self-destruct button, blowing his own massive corporate empire to absolute ash. I was sitting at a small, wrought iron table on the shaded outdoor patio of my favorite neighborhood bakery. It was approaching 9:30 in the morning. I was halfway through a buttery almond croissant and deeply engrossed in a fascinating historical biography. Thoroughly enjoying the gentle, warm morning breeze, the world felt wonderfully quiet. That quiet was violently shattered when a massive black luxury sport utility vehicle screeched to a chaotic halt right at the curb, its tires aggressively scraping the concrete edge. Julian Vance practically threw himself out of the driver's side door. He was an absolute disaster. A stunning departure from the immaculate executive I had seen just 3 days prior. His bespoke suit jacket was nowhere to be seen. His expensive silk tie was yanked loose and hanging crookedly around his neck, and large, dark patches of nervous sweat heavily stained his crisp white dress shirt. He had clearly violated numerous privacy protocols by frantically digging through my confidential human resources file to find my home address, and after finding my apartment empty, he must have aggressively interrogated my doorman to discover where I usually ate my morning meals. He marched aggressively onto the patio, his chest heaving, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He drew irritated glares and hushed whispers from the other patrons, but he did not care. He slammed his sweaty palms down on my small table, rattling my porcelain saucer and causing my silver spoon to clatter loudly. "You think you are so incredibly clever, do you not?" he hissed, spit flying from his trembling lips. His voice was a frantic, strained whisper attempting to be a shout. "Give me the override keys right now. You are going to open that laptop, log into the central terminal, and you are going to hand over the administrative access tokens immediately. If you do not fix this catastrophic mess within the next 5 minutes, I am going to sue you into absolute oblivion. I have a team of corporate lawyers who charge $2,000 an hour, and I will unleash all of them on you. I will have you federally indicted for corporate sabotage, malicious compliance, and the destruction of company property. You will spend the next 20 years rotting in a federal penitentiary." I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I slowly reached out, picked up my teacup, and took a delicate, unhurried sip of my Earl Grey tea. I savored the warm, floral taste for a moment before placing the cup gently back onto its saucer with a soft, dismissive clink. "Julian, you really need to lower your voice. You are disturbing the other customers," I said, offering him a perfectly polite, completely hollow smile. "Furthermore, you cannot sue an individual for strictly following federal law. I did not sabotage a single piece of your property. When you unilaterally and officially terminated my employment, I was legally obligated by the United States government to immediately report my change in status to the Defense Compliance Portal. To do otherwise would have been a severe federal crime on my part. I did exactly what my strict compliance mandate required. I am simply a private citizen who filed her paperwork on time. The military system is doing exactly what it was engineered to do when a civilian company is no longer legally authorized to hold highly sensitive national security data." The fake, aggressive alpha male, bravado instantly drained from his pale face, replaced by a look of raw, unadulterated terror. The realization that his legal threats were completely empty hit him like a physical punch to the stomach. His legs seemed to suddenly give out beneath him, and he collapsed heavily into the iron chair opposite me, burying his face in his trembling hands. The ferocious tyrant was gone. Now came the pathetic, desperate bargaining. "Please," he whispered, his voice cracking violently, stripping away any remaining dignity. "Please, Isla, you have to help me. The Department of Defense just suspended our $4 billion active contract. The Wall Street investment banks just completely pulled out of the initial public offering. We are losing tens of millions of dollars every single hour. The board of directors is going to absolutely destroy my entire life. I will give you whatever you want. I will authorize a brand new contract for you right here, right now. I will pay you triple your old salary. I will write you a signing bonus of $1 million this very afternoon. I will immediately promote you to Chief Technology Officer. Just please, Please come back to the office with me right now and fix this error. I am begging you." I looked at him. I really, truly looked at him. The arrogant, untouchable corporate predator who had proudly dismissed 10 long years of my life's tireless work as a redundant operational expense was now a trembling, broken shell of a man, pleading for his professional life over a plate of half-eaten pastries. It was a beautiful, poetic sight. I picked up my silk bookmark, smoothed the ribbon out with my fingers, and gently closed my hardcover book. I leaned slightly across the small table, maintaining absolute, unwavering eye contact with the desperate man in front of me. "You know, Julian," I said, my voice soft but incredibly sharp, carrying the lethal weight of absolute victory. "You gave me some truly excellent advice just 3 days ago in your office. You told me not to take it personally. You confidently stated that in the business world, absolutely everyone is replaceable, even me." I let his own venomous words hang heavily in the warm morning air, watching them strike him and sink deep into his chest. "So, I suggest you take your own brilliant advice. Go ahead and find my replacement." I stood up slowly, calmly smoothing the minor wrinkles from the front of my dress. I reached into my leather purse, pulled out a crisp $20 bill, and tucked it neatly under my porcelain saucer to generously cover the check and the waiter's tip. As I turned my back to walk away, Julian's smartphone began to ring. The piercing, frantic ringtone shattered the remaining quiet of the patio. He stared down at the glowing screen in sheer horror, his face turning an ashen, lifeless gray. It was the furious chairman of the board of directors. Then, his expensive smartwatch began to vibrate incessantly, lighting up with rapid fire, panic-stricken emails from the frantic corporate legal team. I did not look back even once. I simply walked away down the bright, sunlit sidewalk, leaving the ruined chief executive officer slumped completely over a tiny iron table, entirely alone and drowning in the relentless, deafening noise of his own spectacular destruction. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the Supreme Executive Board of Etherisk Grid had convened a mandatory, emergency summit inside the top-floor boardroom. The atmosphere inside the vast room, dominated by a massive polished mahogany table, was highly toxic and thick with unchecked fury. 12 furious investors, senior directors, and managing partners were relentlessly tearing Julian Vance apart. The financial bleeding was catastrophic. In less than 6 hours, hundreds of millions of dollars in market valuation had completely evaporated into thin air as rumors of the suspended defense contract leaked to the financial press. The corporate attorneys had spent the entire morning frantically digging through the federal contract clauses, finally uncovering the massive, hidden truth that Julian had willfully ignored. They found the core encryption trust. They found the licensing agreement. They discovered the identity of the sole trustee. The board members quickly realized the grim reality of their situation. They did not need a team of brilliant hackers. They did not need a public relations spin. They desperately needed a new, ironclad licensing agreement, and the only person on earth who held the legal authority to grant it was the exact woman their arrogant chief executive officer had practically thrown out of the building. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. I did not knock. I did not ask for permission to enter. I simply walked right past the stunned executive assistant and stepped into the room. I was wearing a sharply tailored navy blue suit, projecting an aura of absolute, unbreakable calm. I was no longer a subordinate employee begging for my desk back. I was the absolute owner of their entire technological foundation, holding the very lifeblood of their massive corporate empire firmly in my hands. The chaotic shouting in the room instantly ceased. The silence was so profound you could hear the air conditioning humming in the background. Julian, whose face was completely pale and covered in a slick sheen of nervous sweat, tried to speak, but the chairman of the board silenced him immediately with a harsh, violent wave of his hand. I stood confidently at the head of the long table, looking down at the most powerful people in the company. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," I began, my voice steady and commanding. "I understand Etherisk Grid is currently experiencing a critical operational failure. regarding its federal compliance protocols. I am here to offer a permanent solution. Isla, the chairman said, his tone a desperate mixture of authority and pleading. We deeply apologize for the grievous oversight regarding your employment. We are prepared to offer you your position back immediately, with full retroactive pay and a substantial raise. I am going to stop you right there, I interrupted smoothly, placing a newly drafted, thick legal portfolio onto the polished wood of the table. I have absolutely zero interest in returning to my previous role as an employee of this organization. I am not here to negotiate a salary. I am here to facilitate an acquisition. I slid the heavy document toward the center of the table. I am offering to sell the perpetual, unrestricted rights to the cryptographic architecture directly to Aetheris Grid. You will no longer need an active architecture guarantor on your payroll, and your military contracts will be restored within the hour. The price for this permanent transfer of ownership is $50 million in cash, paid immediately upon signing, plus a permanent 5% royalty on all future federal defense contracts utilizing this specific framework. Several board members gasped loudly at the astronomical figure, but the corporate lawyers behind them were already vigorously nodding their heads. They knew it was a bargain compared to losing a $4 billion government deal and facing federal prosecution. However, I continued, my gaze shifting slowly and deliberately toward the trembling man sitting near the middle of the table. There is one final, completely non-negotiable condition attached to this sale. Julian Vance must be terminated immediately, right here, right now, in this very room. Julian jumped to his feet, knocking his heavy leather chair backward. You cannot do this. I am the chief executive, he screamed, his voice breaking hysterically. I completely ignored him and kept my eyes locked on the chairman. He is to be stripped of all unvested equity. He will receive absolutely zero severance pay. His termination must be legally filed under the specific clause of gross managerial misconduct resulting in catastrophic financial damage. If he remains employed by this company for one more minute, I will walk out that door, take my intellectual property, and let this entire glass tower burn to the ground. It did not take even 60 seconds of deliberation. The chairman did not even bother to look at Julian. He simply called for an emergency vote. All 12 hands around the massive table went up instantly. It was a completely unanimous decision. Julian screamed in protest, throwing a wild tantrum, but 2 large corporate security guards were already entering the boardroom. They forcefully grabbed him by his arms, aggressively stripped the executive access badge from his chest, and physically escorted the ruined, humiliated man out of the building. He had lost everything. His career, his fortune, and his false sense of superiority were entirely destroyed. The chairman quickly signed the massive buyout agreement and slid it back to me. I picked up my favorite heavy titanium pen, applied my signature to the bottom line, and secured the contract in my bag. I walked out of that magnificent glass building into the warm afternoon sun, breathing in the fresh air and smiling with absolute, unbothered satisfaction. I had permanently proven that true value never lies in a superficial corporate title. It lies in the unshakable leverage and the undeniable worth you have built with your own 2 hands. Thank you so much to our wonderful audience for listening to today's story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know your city or country in the comments below. As a reminder, because our channel can no longer sustain itself here, we will not be uploading any new videos on YouTube in the near future. We are moving our operations entirely to Patreon. If you enjoyed this story and want to help us keep producing content, please support us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon. There, you will hear the absolute best, most detailed, exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can join right now by scanning the Patreon QR code on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the video description or the pinned comment. Thank you again for your incredible support, and I will see you over on Patreon for our next great revenge story.